but I do appreciate your participation. It definitely means that you're listening. I think it's great. So again, these are common problems that we see. You know, the age of the system, or things, something you need to look at if you're helping somebody determine if they need to upgrade. You know, like I said, if they have those old brass heads, or they have you say, does it make a noise when the head goes around? Those are definite signs that they need to upgrade. Even these spray pop-up heads eventually wear out. Now, this is a very common problem where people will call me and say, my head's leaking. Is their head really leaking? Heads don't have a mechanism generally for leaking. That means that the zone, the valve that turns on the system is leaking, and it's leaking out the lowest head. So you can always identify where the lowest head is on the system. If you have a leaking valve, it's where all the water is sitting on the head. So there's no closed. I mean, some heads have a check valve, but most heads are open to atmosphere. So if the source pipe is water's coming down the source pipe, it's going to leak out. Wherever it's going to leak out, it's generally going to be gravity speaking, it's going to be the lowest point. Then you have heads that are spraying in the wrong direction. Here you have probably a crack in a pipe, and it's just bubbling up and going over the street. So determining the efficiency of the system, you know, there are companies that can do an audit and actually test the system, and where you can actually do an analysis and do water calcs and actually show them how much they would save if they upgraded the system. And sometimes it can be a payback of a very short period, less than a year or two. And then after that, you save a lot. Plus, you know, with a lot of people are on tiered rates now, so the more they use, the more they pay. Common symptoms of dry spots. No, there are plant diseases that can also look similar, but a lot of plant diseases are brought on by drought. Just like all of us, if we get a little stressed, we're more likely to get sick. If you don't get enough sleep, you don't eat right, or a lot of tension at work, or maybe at home, it can get to your system. So it's the same, plants are the same. If they're a little bit drought stressed, then the insect's going to be much easier to take over. So again, these are common areas where, you know, what it looks like when you have dry spot. We have what we call a soil probe, which you folks may be familiar with. Again, I don't know all your background, but this is a very common tool that anybody that is a water manager or a horticulturalist should have. It does a couple of things. One is it of course lets you see a soil profile of what type of soil you have. You can look at the amount of root system that's in the soil, and you can see how moist it is. So this is a soil probe.
Where can you get those?
You can buy them right here.
All right. Thank you.
They're,
$15.
another really common tool I talked about, pressure gauge. I carry this with me everywhere I go, pretty much. Critical for diagnosing irrigation issues. We've talked about several of them: high pressure, low pressure, volume issues. This is a great tool for that. Where do you connect a water pressure gauge? There's a couple of places you can connect them. Usually I'll have a hose bib adapter, so right where you connect your hose. Sometimes there's what we call an anti-backflow device. That's that little brass thing sticking out of the ground. There's usually petcocks there that you can connect to. That's going to give you a true source. Sometimes a hose bib is coming off the house pressure, and the house has a regulator, so that's going to give you sometimes a false read. So if you are reading off a house line, it's really important to figure out if there's a regulator or not, because you may not be getting the actual water pressure that the irrigation system is seeing. Okay. Other sources of water than paying the city or the county or whoever you're paying for your water. Gray water systems, which is basically water that's already been used in your home. Typically it's washing machine, shower, sink water. generally not any other common sources that you would have in your house. They're becoming more and more popular. We've installed several of them. Rain catchment, it's great. I'd say the only problem with rain catchment is we live in an area where the only time we get rain is in the wintertime. Rarely do we get summer rain. And that means you need to store the water for several months. And storage is expensive. So I've put in rain catchment systems, but I'm very honest with my client, and I said, look, you're not doing this to save money. You're doing this to save water. It costs a lot of money to store enough water to make this useful. But if you're really into water conservation and you have the resources available, then rain catchment is great.
Where does the financial part come in? Buying the barrel?
It's the storage. It's the storage. Yeah, that you can. A typical roof can produce a lot of water. You're paying $3 to $4 per 1,000 gallons right now. You try buying a 10,000 gallon storage container that you could probably the average house you could probably store 10,000 gallons of water. The question is how much does the unit cost? It's going to cost probably $5,000. And are you going to have it above ground? It's not exactly the most pretty thing in the world. If you're going to bury it, then you're going to add another several thousand. So you might have 10 grand into this thing. And to save, the payback period is going to be a long, long time. But it's a neat idea, and people are doing it, and it works. I don't want to downplay it. I just, you're going to get calls like that, and I think it's good to be honest with them. Like, hey, you can do it. You can get these rain barrels. They're not very expensive, but that rain barrel, holds maybe 100 gallons. That's it. Maybe 50 gallons. And, you can have one on each downspout, and you might save a few hundred gallons. But again, how much does a few hundred gallons cost you right now? Now, prices will go up eventually for water, but right now, a few hundred gallons is a few bucks.
Just a point, even if you don't have that much, by using some rainwater intermittently to wash up and stuff.
Yeah, rainwater is the best water, no question. Everything always looks better because it does. A lot of our water comes from the Colorado River, and there's a lot of minerals. I don't know if any of you have been to Lake Skinner, but that's where the main source of Colorado River comes in and gets filtered. You should see the mountains of what they call soil amendment, which really it is. It's just it's big brown mountains of soil that they pull out of the water. It's phenomenal. And then whatever doesn't get pulled out of the water that's what makes those white stains on your fences, on the tree trunks, and it's just a bunch of minerals. And sometimes it gets built up to a level where you get tip burn on the plants, and that's why that nice rain once in a while helps out. Water wells. I'm seriously considering mine because I got photovoltaic panels, so now my biggest monthly bill is my water bill, other than my mortgage, you'd say. Leach fields. My front yard where I just put my landscaping in, I'm on a septic system, so that's some free water for your plants. They're usually 2 to 4 feet deep, somewhere around there. And so the plants are there growing there long enough, they're going to benefit from that moisture. Overwatering by neighbors. The reason I put that on there is I've got a pretty good sized property, and there's one side of it I don't irrigate at all. My neighbor waters for me every day. He doesn't even notice. So I didn't even bother. I don't even have a zone there. No pipe in the ground, nothing, and the plants are gorgeous. So keep that in mind. It's a great way to keep your water bill down. Streams and springs. We've had some projects that once in a while, like we put in a retaining wall and we hit a spring. The sad part was I had the water test and it was really salty. But I was so ready to put in a pump system and have that client irrigate, but we had to run it out to the street because it ran constantly. It was probably about 3 or 4 gallons a minute.
Wow.
Constant water, but it was too salty.
What if you can't filter that?
I suppose you could. Yeah, but that would take, you'd probably be changing out the cartridge pretty regularly. Okay, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but, clay, silt, sand, And the combination of those gives you a nice loam. I may be kind of crazy, but when I go to buy a property, I don't look at the house. I do soil testing. And I'm in my third house, and all three houses have this beautiful loamy soil. It's so much easier to grow stuff. You know, most of your folks that are going to be calling you, you know, they bought a house where the developer scraped off the top of a mountain, and the soil hasn't seen the light of day in a million years, and there's no structure to it. There's no organic matter. That whole cycle's got to be started. So it's really important to soil test, not just for pH, but organic matter is the most important thing. But to understand what you're working with, because when you design that irrigation system, when you tell them how much longer they're going to have to water, that all makes a difference. And how the infiltration rate of the soil is really critical. You're probably familiar with the squeeze test. Okay, ground cover mulch. I have found this to be an amazing thing to start using. You know, back when I started my company, we didn't use this. The only thing we ever used was bark. Well, that's not really a ground cover mulch. It is a ground cover, but it's not a mulch. Bark doesn't insulate, it doesn't add organic matter to the soil until it gets really, really old. Bark is there to protect the tree. So this mulch is derived from the actual wood tissue of the plant. And it does all of these things wonderfully. It's an amazing weed barrier. My front yard used to look like a football field. It was just a big turf area when I bought my place. As soon as my kids were old enough, and I got tired of paying the water bill, I just covered it with mulch. I didn't even spray it. I didn't do anything, but I put 3 inches of mulch over the top. It eventually, I never saw the lawn again. It decomposed and died, and there was all kinds of kikuya and things that are really hard to kill. But when you give it no sunlight, it dies. And so I had 8 years of composting, and now I just planted it. So beautiful, beautiful soil. So I didn't have any maintenance on it other than
You must
adding
not
mulch
have
to
a
it. That's all.
homeowners association.
I am proud to say I've never lived in an HOA. I deal with them every day. I don't need to live with having one in my house. I've been in some really interesting HOA meetings. So, as a weed barrier, it's phenomenal. As an insulator, the reason I put insulator in there is because you can have, I live in Escondido, hot summer days, just like here. It's hot outside, you dig down and it's cool. Soil's cool, it's moist, and it's a whole different environment, and it's a great place for root systems. So it helps minimize moisture loss. When we finish a project like we did here, we did this slope, it gives you more of a finished feel, finished look. Eventually breaks down and adds organic matter to the soil. It's very inexpensive. This is where all the facilities take the trimmings from the landscapers, grind it up, compost it, and then sell it or give it to you depending on where you're getting it from. So with organic matter, it helps build the soil structure, which is really, really important. Soil fertility makes or breaks a project. That's why every installation we do, we take soil samples, we send them to a lab, they test for macronutrients and organic matter, and then whatever's missing or whatever's off, we make those adjustments, and then we amend the soil. And then the thing that we do is, if it was a soil that definitely had some serious issues, we'll retest the soil to see if the amendments actually accomplish what we wanted. So, evapotranspiration, are you familiar with that term? Yes. Okay, great. So, as you know, it's just that you're looking at the amount of moisture that's lost between evaporation and transpiration through the plant. What affects it, of course, is all these conditions we talked about. How warm it gets, how much wind there is, the humidity that's in the air. When we get these dry Santa Ana days, you can just watch the moisture get sucked out of your plants. You know that you're going to have to irrigate. The type of plant, a big tropical tree with big wide leaves is going to lose a lot more moisture than a drought-tolerant gray leaf with little hairs on it. It's going to lose a lot less moisture. So, knowing your plant material, and of course, the other problem is that people have mixed gardens where they'll have drought tolerant plants and then they'll have more water thirsty plants. And of course, the rule is you got to water to the thirstiest plant. It's unless you don't mind losing that plant. So zoning is really important that people understand that when you're planting a garden, that you separate the plant material. And you can even get a little fancy. Let's say you just have a garden and you have these drought tolerant plants, but you've got this one tropical plant that you think would fit really well. Well, with a drip system, you can do that. You just run a drip line from a different zone, and even though it's right in the middle of all these other plants, you can irrigate that thing independently, so that you can water that every other day when you water the natives once every 3 weeks. As long as they're not too close to one another where it affects the other plants. If your client has to have lawn, then I'll try to put it not where it's full sun, where maybe it's half-day sun. Depends on the type of grass, but that lawn will use a lot less water depending on where you put it.
Steve,
Yes.
do you try to talk your clients into not having lawns?
Yes, I do. I have to respect that it's their house and it's their money. Those are two major rules. But I am there to educate them, and a lot of times I'll ask them, well, let's say they want to renovate their lawn, or let's say they had a lawn at their last house, and I'll ask them, how often did you use it? They look at me, use it? They don't use it. They just mow it and fertilize it and water it. So then a lot of people, they'll just be thinking, I don't know what else would you do? In fact, that's the very most common statement I get after not doing the lawn. Well, what else would you put there? That's all they can think of.
I have a question relating to evaporation and mulch. And it's this, when you can mulch on the top and your sprinkles go on and you water, a certain amount of the water is retained in the mulch. And because you can put mulch on a certain soil, the surface area, you would also increase evaporation from the mulch. So, it seems to me, I understand the multiple thing, but it also seems to me like it would retain moisture once the moisture is in the ground. We all do. Some of that moisture is lost.
It's a good point. When you have a mulch garden, you're going to lose. The point being made is that the mulch may be a barrier for the water to get into the soil. And another good vote for drip, because you're not broadcasting, you're actually irrigating. When we put in a drip system, put the plants in the ground, we put the emitters to the plants, then the mulch goes on top. So that's the best. But even with a spray system, think about it. Mulch is very, what we call, would be your most coarse soil, right? It's not much of a barrier. So when you irrigate over mulch, the water goes right through the mulch. It doesn't run off the mulch. Sure, are you going to lose some at the surface, but it's nowhere in comparison to what you're going to save by keeping the water, or by keeping the soil cool. It's not going to lose a bunch of moisture.
It seems like it absorbs a lot of water. It's kind of this woody type of
It may seem like it absorbs a lot of water, but it really doesn't. It's a very coarse. It's sort of like sand. You can pour water into sand, and you pour enough water, it just runs out the bottom, because the sand particles can't hold on to much moisture. Clay can, because it has much more of an attraction for other clay particles, creates smaller pore space, so you can have a lot of water attached to clay. But I compare mulch to like sand. It's not much is going to stick to mulch. And that insulating property way outweighs any moisture we lose through the mulch. It keeps that soil cool. Think of it this way: if you had an area that was open to soil, within a mulched area, I guarantee you more moisture will be lost there, because what happens is that top of the soil gets hot, dry, and other moisture comes up to replace that, and it's this cycle. But with mulch, you might lose a little moisture off the top of the mulch, but it's such a great insulator that whatever moisture is in the soil is going to stay there. Literally, 4 or 5 months after a rain, I can dig down through 3 inches of mulch and it's still wet. You try doing that with bare soil. It's not possible. So it's an amazing way to reduce water use, to minimize applications of water. Because really what's happening is with irrigation, all you're doing, all you should be doing is replacing whatever moisture you lost through evapotranspiration. That's all you're doing. There's a certain amount of moisture in the soil. Once half of that moisture is depleted, the general rule is 50% of the available water is gone. You need to replace it to get back up to 100. Once it goes down to 50 again, that's all you're doing is replacing it. So these were basically, I got all these, pots. Pots should be on their own system. Why should pots be on their own system? Anybody have any thoughts on that? They dry out faster. Why do they dry out faster? The whole root system is exposed to sunlight, right? To this hot pot. Especially a hanging basket's even worse because now it's in the air. I mean, I love hanging baskets. I have them at my house, but they are in a different zone specifically for that reason. It's funny, I live my company's right next to a elementary school. I thought it was back there for a minute.
Now, if you dig your pots down into the earth,
If you dig your pots down into the earth, then they're going to use less water. But they're typically going to need more frequent irrigation, and the reason is what soil do you have in your pots? It's potting soil. Does it hold on to moisture very well? No. So that means you're going to have to replenish. So big no-no to have pots on an existing system, because typically, just to give you an idea, programming for a drip system, we use gallon per hour emitters. Mature plants are going to be on approximately 45 minutes to an hour and a half, depending on how deep we're trying to water. Pots, 2 minutes. You connect those two together, you got a problem, right? And that you'll find that. Now, sometimes it's a pain because you got a pot here and one over there and one, all over the place. And it's so much easier to connect it into a system that's right there. If you have to do that, then what you want to do is not, if you have a drip system, then you want to use like a spot spitter or a mini sprinkler or a bubbler in the pot because, no, the opposite of that. What am I thinking? The other way. You want to minimize, I guess if you had that, let's say you had 2 gallon an hour per emitters in the garden, you'd want to put a ½ gallon an hour emitter into the pot. So at least you can make it a little bit more even, but really optimally you should have a separate valve that controls your pot. Same with the fruit trees. My parents have an orange grove, probably a 100-year-old orange grove because it was there when they built their house 50 years ago and it was a mature grove then. Once a month during the summer, that's all they irrigate. Once every 30 days they get more oranges than they know what to do with. Now these are mature trees with trunks this big round, big root systems. But my father was telling me, he says, man, I never get any avocados. And I looked at him and I said, where did you connect that system in? Well, he's watering his avocados once a month during the summer. You know what an avocado tree looks like? Once a month during summer, not very happy. A lot of brown leaves. So I had him put it on a separate valve. He waters it during the summer every other day. Now, that may sound like a lot, but with avocados, they have a very shallow root system. You water for a very short period of time. So they're watering the citrus for 15 hours with a mini sprinkler system, and they're watering the avocado with a mini sprinkler system for 5 or 10 minutes, but it's every other day. That's what avocados are. They're a tropical tree. So you don't have to waste, feel like you're wasteful if you want to grow your own avocados, as long as you don't have 100 trees, you just got a couple of them. You can grow your own fruit without wasting a lot of water, but you've got to have it on its own system. Or maybe you tie it to your vegetable garden because that pretty much has the same water requirements. You got to water it often, but for a very short period of time. The main goal in water management is to water as infrequently as possible and to water the root depth. That's what you want to do. How often have I had a client call me and say, look, I don't understand it. I water my lawn every day, and by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I got dry spots in my lawn. And I go out there, and sure enough, the program on the clock is every day, 10 minutes. It's the automatic program that came in the clock. Nobody ever adjusted it. 10 minutes every day. and then I'll use my soil probe, and sure enough, I'll go down about 1.5 inches, and it just stops. And I shove it up and down, I get it down a little farther, I pull it out, and that first 2 inches is a thick mat of, a thick mat of roots, and then below that is just dry soil with nothing in it. A good, healthy root system in a fescue lawn, which is probably 90% of what you see out there, has a root system 12 to 18 inches deep. His lawn irrigation, his lawn root system is 2 inches deep. So think about it. Why does a newborn want to be fed all the time? How big is their stomach and how much energy are they burning? Well, that's why they want to eat every couple hours. Well, a lawn like he has a very small stomach. That root system is tiny. So even though he irrigated that morning, by midday, the reserves of that plant are gone. They've been depleted, so the plant dries up and dies. Imagine the root system is now 1 foot deep. So he has 6 times the root system. Now that lawn could go several days, maybe a week in between irrigation cycles. Now it's never going to grow that way the way he irrigates, because if he's watering for 10 minutes, as we talked about before with the spray system, what's happening? After 3 or 4 minutes, so 6 minutes of water is going down the curve. He only gets it that deep, so all I have to do is reprogram the clock. Now we have to wean the lawn off, because if I just crank it up to once a week and then have multiple start times, his lawn's going to stress because his root system is still only 2 inches. So I've got to make sure I do a soil test, make sure the fertilization, that the minerals and the elements are there to have a good vigorous root system, and then I start getting that water deeper and deeper and deeper. Eventually the lawn will grow that root system, and maybe by next season, now he can water instead of every day and still have it turn brown. He can water once a week and it doesn't turn brown at all. So I'd reprogram the clock. I pull it down to 4 minutes with maybe 4 start times, so I'm actually watering 16 minutes during the night, but I break it up into 4 sections. And now I can take my soil probe, and now the water is down deep, and now the roots have a place to grow. And now he can have that bigger stomach for his lawn. So that works for shrubs, trees, all of these things. You're trying to get a strong, vigorous root system, which means water as infrequently as possible. And then when you do water, I don't care if it's in the summer, winter, spring, or fall, you want to water to the rooted depth of the plant. Does that make sense to everybody? This is a really crucial water management idea, is to wean your clients from watering every day to less and less. And again, it takes time. If they've been watering that way, they have to slowly back off until they can develop that vigorous root system.
Yeah, but when we had the water restrictions a couple years ago, it was 10 minutes.
When I saw the mayor on the TV saying water 10 minutes, he's doing that blanket statement like everybody's got the same soil, the same water system, or to say you can water 3 days a week. Well, I was watering once a month or once every 3 weeks, and he's telling everybody in the world or in the county to water 3 days a week. It doesn't work that way.
So it's important to do what you said and to, like, use a stopwatch or really watch your runoff, and that's how you know how many times you have to run the water to get it to that. Because if you're having runoff, you may have to run it 4 times to get it to that depth.
Right.
But you just have to kind of figure that out.
Well, again, it's a great way to really understand your system is to turn it on, see how long it takes before you notice that water is starting to run off. Then Stevie was talking about 3 minutes or 5 minutes. Well, you'll know. And if it's a rotary system, maybe it's 20 minutes. But you'll know where that point is. I should never water longer duration than this many minutes because it's just getting wasted.
Is that the same with cooling? So say you have a tree and it's cooling and then it's running off.
Yeah, it's the same idea. Yeah,
Okay.
if it goes past the basin, what's the point of adding more water? It's just getting wasted. So yeah, that's a really good correlation. When does water start to get wasted? I'm going to shut the system off just before that happens. So if you notice that 5 minutes it's running off, then don't water for more than 4 minutes. And then again with your soil probe, this one you can use, or a moisture sensor actually has a needle on it and says if it's wet or dry. I didn't bring that. I could have brought that one with me, but it's just a thin piece of brass that's got a point at the end and allows you to probe the soil, and then there's a needle that tells you if it's wet or dry. That's a great tool for knowing how deep your system's actually getting the water into the ground, and then that can help you determine how many cycles you need to irrigate to get to that watering depth.
You know if the neighbors are manufacturers or they want to start irrigation?
No, I can find out. So if you should have my on those bags is our website. You can get my email address off of that. If not, it's stevej@naturedesigns.net. So that's nature singular, designs plural.net. And I'll get you that information. It's a commercial grade one. You know, you can get them at the local nursery, but I wouldn't trust them. Now, each one of my crews has one of these, the maintenance crews. They go around with that. So, again, we've already talked a bit about this. Time of day to water. Really, if you can, keep your watering between midnight and 7 in the morning. What are a couple of reasons we want to do that? Anybody have any thoughts? Okay, minimize evaporation. Even right now, we got a slight breeze, barely anything, but generally, especially in San Diego, you don't have much going on breeze-wise in the middle of the night.
Speaking of custom disease classes, they take you not water at night, so.
Well, what they mean is don't water at 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 at night.
Okay.
See, between midnight and 7 a.m. is actually morning. So if you really, but yeah, because that's one of the other reasons is you don't want moisture sitting on the leaves all night long. So worst time is afternoon, evening. That's the worst time to water. And that's because that afternoon is windy, evening that means that moisture is going to stay on those plants all the way for at least 12 hours, and you don't want that to happen.
But if you're using the drip system.
Right. Kind of blows out all those rules. I appreciate you clarifying that. That this does not count drip systems. Drip systems you can water whenever you want. Another plus about drip systems is when they did have the drought, which wasn't restricted, it was drip systems, you could still irrigate in most communities anytime you wanted. It was spray that was regulated.
So that being the case, what time of day would be best for drips?
I'd say when you're walking around the yard. So when you're out, because that way if there's a leak or something, you're more likely to see it. That's one of the problems with automatic systems is people forget about them. And you've seen it. Neighbors got heads shooting out every morning. The same thing. They don't even know because they take care of the yard and they don't think about it, or the gardener doesn't even test the system. So that's what I would prefer. Is I have drip systems to run when it's most likely. If we maintain the property when we're there, and then you're more likely to see any problems.
So the plant itself doesn't the heat of the day?
No.
It's not necessarily.
Not unless it's a brand new garden that you're trying to get established. An establishment is a whole different ballgame. When you put new plants in the ground in the summertime, you need to irrigate often. So all of these general rules are kind of out the window. You put sod down during August, you better be watering at least 4 times a day. Now, do we water for 4 or 5 minutes? No. Sod has no roots. They've all been cut off. It's just what's in the inch of soil you got with the sod. So that means you're just trying to keep that wet. I still have trouble with my own staff trying to explain this, is that with a sod, that means you're watering for 1, maybe 2 minutes. You might be doing it 4 or 5 times during the day because you don't want it to dry out. You really don't need to water sod at night. But once it gets established, then you start backing it up, and then you start getting more into that mode of infrequently but deeply. But it's the opposite. It's like a vegetable garden. You water frequently and shallow with new plantings. Yes.
Watering a new depth. How do you get a profile of that? Establish trees, crops, estimating the time frame of when they have that.
Good question. So how do you know the proper depth of shrubs or trees that are mature? Well, I don't have the website, but I know that information is available. You could probably just go on Google and type, let's say it's a liquid ambar, or it's a ceanothus, or whatever you are looking for. And my guess is that information is out there, either UC Riverside or somebody's done a study and say, yeah, if you have a mature liquid ambar tree, you should expect the rooting depth to be 20 inches or 30 inches. That or you got to get a shovel. So again, water. And the reason I have it end at 7 is most people are not up before then. Some crazy contractors are up at 5 in the morning every day, but you know, so you don't want to interrupt their shower with water hammer and the low water pressure, because you know some irrigation systems could be a huge demand and really lower the water pressure. So that's the other reason I like to do it by then. But usually, you know, about that time then the sun comes up, dries the leaves off, so they're not staying wet all night long. Using the programs, making sure, so programs are designed to be able to water things at different frequencies. So program A, B, C, D, or 1, 2, 3, 4 are ways to separate, hey, I want to water the lawn every 3 days. I want to be able to water my fruit trees once every 3 weeks. I want to be able to water my hanging baskets once a day. Those are what the programs are for. The start times are, okay, when that program runs, when is it going to come on? And again, we want to set those start times for drip anytime. Drip only needs one start time. You don't need to do multiple start times for drip unless, again, it's drip for a hanging basket, or maybe it's you just planted your veggie garden and you put seeds down and you got to make sure the seeds don't dry out. But other than that, if it's just drip for plantings like you see out here, you don't have to worry about runoff. You want to take advantage of the water spread with drip emitters, so dump it all at once. Rotors, spray heads, there are even some rotor systems that are super low precipitation rate where you only need one start time. But I generally make the rules, if it broadcast irrigates, you want to use multiple start times. Generally 3 is a good starting point. It could be way more than that, but most of our programs that we've set have at least 3 start times for a spray system or broadcast system. The run times, again, that's how long the valve's open, and the quick and easy way, and this is something, again, when you get a phone call and somebody's asking you, hey, how long should I water for? You can always say, well, turn the water on and then see how long. Some people will say it starts running off immediately, and that means they have really poor spray patterns, or they have a leak. Other people will say, hey, I don't see any running off at all. Sometimes you got to look carefully. That it's not so easy to see, but again, that's a good way to determine run times. Most clocks have a choice of picking days of the week, or what we call skip days. I'm a big fan of skip days. I think it's so much easier since we have an odd number of days in a week. When you've determined, yeah, it's good to water about every 3 days, well, how do you program that into your irrigation controller? So if you use skip days, which just means water every 3 days, or water every, the reason I like it is, let's say you have a program to water every 3 days, and then we get a hot spell, and you notice things are starting to dry out. All you have to do is go from every 3 to every 2, and you're done. With a regular controller, now you got to say, okay, instead of Mondays and Thursdays, what do I, now I got to, it's going to be only 2 days separation here, and it's going to be 3 days separation there. Other people say, well, look, but I mow my lawn on Fridays, and I don't want it to be wet. Well, what I suggest you do is mow it at the end of the day, so it doesn't matter when it comes on. There are sophisticated controllers that have the skip day setting, but it also has a setting to say don't water on Friday. So it'll skip and water every 3 days, and if the third day is on a Friday, it'll wait till the next day and water on Saturday. So if you got a real fancy clock, you can do that. And then there's a water budget feature, which I'm not a big fan of. Anybody familiar with water budget features on irrigation controllers? Okay. So what that allows you to do is say, well, I'm set it at 100%, and then maybe during the winter I set it at 40% or 60%. The problem with all of those controllers that I've seen so far is, what do? They don't affect the frequency, they affect the duration. Remember what I said, you want to water to the rooting depth. Well, if it affects the duration, that means it's not going to water as deeply. I want it to affect, and I've been talking to the manufacturers, I think they should set it to where it adjusts how often the water comes on, not how long it runs for. So, hopefully that makes sense. So the overview, you can apply water in lots of different ways, from the hose to a fancy SEMA station program. Water management is the most powerful tool for saving water. Again, all these wonderful components, drip systems, automatic controllers with multiple start times, moisture sensors, rain sensors, these are all great tools, but nothing more powerful than the person that's actually programming the clock. You have all these homeowners. How many of you, when you bought your house, there was an owner's manual that says how much you water? Zero, right? It tells you, you know, how often to drain the water heater and how often to, you know, clean the ducting or whatever. But it doesn't say anything about the irrigation system and how often to water because it's a little too complicated. So most people are completely guessing. They have no idea. When I was at Cal Poly, they did a study and they found out the average homeowner watered 300% more than they needed. So when I talk about saving water, this is the place. It's management, it's understanding how much you water. And that's why I mentioned at the beginning about the, you know, when we had the downturn in the economy, there's all these houses in foreclosure, how many trees and shrubs were just perfectly fine without getting any supplemental water. Any of you who've been around a while, you might remember on, where was it? Black Mountain Road. It was Springtime Growers, a huge nursery that went out of business. And they had bougainvilleas planted all along Black Mountain Road, along their nursery. And 5-6 years after that nursery was long gone, no irrigation whatsoever, the most beautiful bougainvilleas you've ever seen. You know, that was a perfect example. You know, that's a very drought tolerant plant. Lantana is another one. I mean, I have lantana in my house, and it reseeds where there's no water, and it grows. It's a way underutilized plant. It just doesn't take cold very well, but other than that, it's an amazing drought tolerant plant. Irrigation efficiency, you know, putting the water where it's needed. What I like about drip, another great reason is that you're only irrigating where you need it. So if you have a garden, let's say like this garden here, there's some places 3, 4, 5 feet in between plants. Well, there's really no reason to be irrigating there. If you have a spray system, it's going to irrigate 100% of the area. If you have a drip system, it's only going to irrigate where you put the emitters. And that's one of the areas where you can really save. We did a project in Fallbrook where a client had a half an acre of 2-to-1 slope. And I had a hard time getting it through. It was a few years ago through the county, but they finally allowed me to put a drip system on the slope. And now he's got a mature planting, and it's never had spray water of any kind. And the emitters are 4 feet. The plants are 4 feet apart, and so the emitters are about 3 to 4 feet apart. And that means in between every plant, he doesn't have any weeds. He has happy plants because it's a slope, and the emitter waters deeply because there's no runoff. He takes advantage of every drop of water that gets put on that slope. Now, I've had other clients that put in drip systems and they waste water. How do they do that? How could you possibly waste water with a drip system? They water every day, and you know, they're completely overwatering the system. Or I've had other clients that say, oh, that drip, it doesn't work. And I'll go check out the programming on the clock. It's watering for 10 minutes every day. Well, a drip system, the emitter puts out 1 gallon per hour. How much is 10 minutes worth of water on a dripper? Enough to get your hand wet. You know, it's not a whole lot. So the gardener had programmed because all of the other systems that he had were 10 minutes to spray. So, you know, he thought that would be fine. It's making sure if you have a problem to do some discovery and figure out exactly what the problem is, what's going on.
Can I ask you a question about that? I was
Yeah.
gonna say, I know it depends on transportation, but how often do you use inline emitters versus putting emitters in?
Okay, good question. So how often do we use inline emitters versus emitters that you install directly on the tubing? So you're all familiar with like Netafim and Hunter. They make tubing that has emitters pre-installed inside the tubing. Because I'm keeping my labor costs down, I like to use that more as much as I can. Where I don't use it is where I have plantings that are 4 or 5 feet apart. Because I don't want to irrigate every foot or every 18 inches or every 24. I only want to water where the plants are. But if I have a mass planting where the plants are every couple of feet, then I use the inline tubing just because it's a much more efficient way to install it. Now, I'm coming from an efficiency aspect of my cost of labor is, you don't even want to know. It's, you know, workers' comp by itself is well over $100,000 is what we pay. I mean, it's just, it's out of control. So any place we can save on labor, we do. And, you know, they're installed properly. You don't have to worry about them coming out. But that's our determining factor. If the plants are far apart, we use regular tubing and only install emitters around the plants. And then we base that on, like what I said, we need an emitter right on the root ball. If it's an agapanthus, I don't have to put it on spaghetti tubing because egg appendix doesn't matter if it gets wet right near the base of the pond. But if it's a drought tolerant or native, it gets, the emitter that sits on the roof all is on that spaghetti tubing. Other than that, we just use inline tubing, half-inch tubing, and put the emitter right in line. And the reason I like to do that is if the spaghetti tubing moves around kind of easy, if it gets pulled out, it creates maintenance issues. And I don't want my clients complaining about the system we installed, and I want it to be dependable. So minimal use of microtubing is my general rule. So understanding what the water requirements are, you know, where are you, how mature is the plant, what is the plant, you know, all of that is going to make a difference on how often and how long you water. Okay, so now we're going to get into watershed. Who's familiar with watershed? Who can tell me what watershed is? What's the definition of watershed? That's good. What's watershed?
It's an area where water, no matter where it comes from, all goes to the same place.
Exactly. Okay, so everybody hear that? Watershed is if you have a certain area, it could be the county of San Diego, it could be your backyard. That's a watershed where water drains from one point and all collects into another point. That's watershed. And this is actually from APLD, this photograph I borrowed. I just went to a seminar this week on that. And what we're doing here is just explain what it is. It's water that falls out of the sky, it's water that comes out of your irrigation system. Where does it end up? And what a lot of people aren't thinking about is, you know, we have that, what we call first flush. We just had that first rain. What happens with the first rain? When we have a decent rain of, let's say, half inch, 3/4, 1 inch. Yeah, the beaches get closed, right? Because there's this accumulation of stuff that gets into the storm drain system. So these are all of the items that I could think of that are common. So when you overwater, use fertilizers, pesticides, even soil, dust, debris, grass clippings, pet waste, trash, oil, fuel, coolant, those things are dripping off of cars and get into the stormwater system, but don't really end up into the ocean until you get that first rain. And that's why it's really important to keep the water on your site. There's no better filter in the world than your soil. So the idea is we've covered a mass amount of our area here, not as bad as LA. LA is out of control where everything's paved. Concrete, buildings, sidewalks, driveways. So the idea is to have permeable surfaces. The more water that you can eliminate from leaving your property, the more you can get to soak into your yard. That filters the water before it goes out down into the ground, and then that can replenish aquifers. It can be reused by plant material that's in your yard. So the goal here is to whatever water does end up in a lake or a stream has already been filtered by your own yard. So we're designing landscapes now. We used to design landscapes where every bit of water was right to the curb, off the property. And now it's the complete opposite. In fact, building new homes, we are not allowed, we have to have these bioswales, basins on site. And that only can it drain into the street if those get overflowed. That's how much things have changed. So, as we've already let go, that storm drain doesn't go to a water treatment plant. Your sewer system hopefully does, but the storm drain goes directly into the ocean. Right? So, sewer water gets treated, storm water does not. Who's responsible for the water that runs off your property? Yeah, the homeowner. Exactly. So, and you. So, beach closures, health risks for humans and animals, loss of tourism dollars. I can't emphasize the importance of that. And you'd be amazed at there's actually calculations you can do based on roof area and how much water you're going to develop in a typical rainstorm, and then you can calculate how much area you need as a lower area in your yard. You can use a lawn as a filtration system. That you can dump the water onto the lawn will filter the water before it runs either into the street or off the property. But the goal is if you can, is to keep all that water on your property.
So Matt Canyon of the Society is all
upset about, and I'm not a member, I just heard one of their lectures, but they're all upset because they're starting to get, either a fine or a fee for runoff. Are you familiar with that? Because of, and a lot of them are saying it's not fair for them because they don't feed a lot, so they don't think that they're adding to the problem. It's organic, but I don't know, how common is that in the county? Are homeowners gonna
Well,
have that?
yeah, right now contractors can get fined up to $10,000 if water runs off a property that they're working. You know, what happens, I don't know exactly politically how it works, but the San Diego has been fined by the EPA. So when the beaches close, they get in trouble. And so they're really pushing on this about any kind of runoff. So when you see on your property, your neighbor's property, you see water running into the curb and gutter, it's worth a conversation just to let them know, hey, you know, there's ways to save water and that contributes to stormwater pollution. So I think any grower, anybody in the business, I mean, most nurseries, they've been controlled for years that you'll see they have holding ponds and places for, because when they irrigate, water runs out of the pots of all the plants they put in and runs into a system and then they repump it out and reuse it. So anybody in the agricultural business, I would hope, would understand that it's wasting water if it runs off and it's a pollutant because that water can carry other things into the ocean. If we didn't have all of this paved area, we would have very little runoff. It would all just soak in like it used to a few hundred years ago, and then the beaches didn't close back then. Even though we have these cars and devices that create pollutants, if we could just keep it in the soil air and let it run through the soil, that'll help filter it.
So the rooftop gardens could help with that as well, right?
Yeah.
Do they usually filter that down into the, is there a way for that to drain out as well?
A rooftop garden can help, just like mulch helps. And the other thing I didn't talk about with mulch is here we did these 2-to-1 slopes. And the other thing that helps is it minimizes erosion. Because think about it, it's this mat of material. Rain hits bare soil, it tends to create ruts and causes erosion. But with this insulating material, it actually spreads out the force of the rain and helps it soak into the ground. So a rooftop would do the same thing.
Do you feel that decomposed granite, you know, if you have a lot of paving, that would be decomposed granite in your walkways and things like that, would be better off there?
Definitely. Decomposed granite is a permeable surface. In fact, in my new garden, I have DG pathways going all over it. So you notice in this garden, they're all DG pathways. Yes?
Is there any initiative statewide or even in the Southwest to catch more runoff water and recycle it? Not to let it run into the ocean or to a lake, but to try to catch it and reuse it?
Yes, there's a lot of rules about catching water and not letting it run off into the street. When we install a project in most cities, a new house, it has to have BMPs, so best management practices. We have to have wattling, so if we disturb the soil, that soil doesn't get into the gutter system. We have to, again, design a drainage system that shows that the water from the roof and the water from the property stay on the property. The only event that it's allowed to go off the property is if the intensity of the rainstorm is so great that it overwhelms these basins that it have predetermined square footage that have to be designed in there, then you have that allowable water to escape. But that's usually only after it's been filtered through a basin. So yes, there's definitely a lot of push, and especially in San Diego, because again, we're always on the news. We get that first big rain, and then we have to close our beaches. And we don't realize it, I think, as much as most people, is that this is a huge tourist attraction, San Diego. We live here, but if they start losing tourism dollars, then it really hurts the economy. So, yeah.
The conversations with neighbors can be very delicate. End up in negotiation. But I'm also thinking other neighbors, i.e. Tijuana, there's so much runoff that we get, and pollution. So, are we having conversations with those kind of neighbors too?
Are we having conversations with Mexico? I know we've built structures for them, but lately I don't know. Do you have an answer?
We're actually being sued by Tijuana because we aren't allowing enough water over the border to fill up their estuaries. and they're losing money off of that. We're also being sued because we're adding pollution just as much as they are.
So yeah, I guess there's conversations that are happening. And you're right, it is a delicate issue. I think talking to your neighbors, it's all in the approach. It's all in the delivery. And if you can come to them without a demeanor of that they don't know anything and you know everything, but if you come to them with that you're actually trying to help them, again, it's all in the selection of the words and the delivery.
Maybe I'll call you.
Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned that. I've done that for a lot of my clients where there's a dispute between the neighbors and I end up trying to get everybody together. And I got a lot of practice dealing with HOAs. Yes.
Shut me up here. Wells, you mentioned wells. There is a feeling though, when you talk about neighbors, that if they have a well, there's no problem with how much water they use.
Yeah. That's true. I have to blame my mother because I was raised
Always
to
blame your mother.
conserve everything. So even though I get free power from the sun, I do not leave a light on. I'm the kind of person, I don't care if the gasoline flowed freely through my house. I would not waste it. It's in my blood. And it's too bad that more and more people don't just practice that, but these are resources that we need to conserve. Believe me, I have some incredibly wealthy clients that care nothing about any of that. They want to put grass everywhere. Cool season, high water using turf, and I do my best to educate them. It's a mindset, and it takes a lot of you got to be passionate about it. I don't know what more to say. It's just conservation. I think is important. We want to have a good place for us and our offspring and others.
Do you have an opinion about buffalo grass as a turf replacement in San Diego County?
Buffalo grass is a turf replacement. I think it's great. We've installed it on a few projects. The limitations are it doesn't come as a sod, so you need to grow it. The best one is that I know is UC Verde buffalo grass, and it comes in plugs, and you plant them depends on how quickly you want to fill in. Yeah, foot on center. No, buffalo grass. They actually have samples. We're going to do a little walking around in the garden and we'll point it out. But it can use, I think, 75% less water than rescue grass. But there's a wonderful display around the corner here which shows several different types of turf grasses and how much water each one of them uses.